Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Rollwise podcast, the fireside chat between three friends talking about games and news in the RPG industry. This week, we tackle a topic that's pretty near and dear to our hearts: the doom of RPGs. Or at least we react to one pot stirrer's take on what the future holds. All of you probably saw the social media post by Ben Riggs. And for people that don't know who Ben Riggs is, he's a D&D historian, and he is the author of The Slaying the Dragon, A Secret History of Dungeons and Dragon, a book that reveals kind of behind the story stuff at TSR. That was the original publisher of D&D, and I guess he's an author that writes for Geek and Sundry, Gizmodo, and some other stuff, according to what I was able to find. He does also have a podcast named Plot Points. So if you guys are interested in hearing more of his commentary, you can catch him through other podcast services. I didn't actually research where you could catch him because I'm not promoting a show. I'm just saying he has one. Um, so, so there's a fairly long post that you saw on a lot of the different social media sites that basically boiled down to saying that the OGL was kind of the catalyst for RPGs being on the downward trend. I don't really think we need to read the entire post, but I think that if anybody wants to see firsthand what the post is, because it's an essay more than it is just like a Twitter post or whatever it is. So I think we could kind of cherry pick some of the parts out of it, and we can kind of talk what we want to talk about. But I mean, the basic thesis is the golden age of RPGs is over. Would you guys agree with that thesis, or what do you guys think?
The first thing that I kind of asked about this, what I started thinking about when I read his golden age of RPGs, is exactly what he means by that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really I guess he just means the proliferation of different games and people being able to get into the games.
Mm.
I don't really know exactly what he means by golden age still to this point. I think that's it, but I can't put my finger on it.
Yeah, I don't know if there's actual numbers out there saying that now, historically, more people than ever are playing tabletop role-playing games or playing Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know because I haven't seen those numbers. I think a lot of people, especially people that love Stranger Things, really want to call this the golden age because, D&D got on television. And I'm not discounting that it had an impact.
Yeah.
But I is it the golden age? Maybe, sure. I mean, if we take that as a thing, sure, then something's eventually going to take you down from the peak, right? If we're at the peak of the most players ever, I don't even know how you'd measure it, but that's how I would probably measure it, because that suggests some sort of financial health and
there is a lot of content creation around role-playing games right now. Like there's a lot of actual plays.
Critical Role's not insubstantial.
Podcasts, Critical Role, stuff like that.
I'm gonna get savage for that, calling them not insubstantial as opposed to huge.
I think that's kind of what he's talking about. But I don't think I see anything like content creation slowing down. I think you'll see dips in the road where like maybe some things aren't as popular and then they come back up. Like real plays seemed to kind of be down. Like last year, there wasn't as many real plays that I think coming out, but I've noticed that several big like YouTube channels started actual plays back up again. And I think that just speaks to the rise of, role-playing game continuing. I think it's got a strong base now, and I think maybe we'll plateau for a while, but I don't see it going down, I guess.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned that D&D was on TV, because I think Stranger Things was one of the more recent times that because and it's not just Stranger Things. I think Stranger Things was just probably the highest profile instance of D&D being on TV. It not being like the butt of a joke, but being just part of a cultural scene, right?
Sure.
The kind of inclusion with not necessarily a negative connotation or like being affiliated with like social awkwardness or something like that. Because you've seen role-playing games and movies, but it's always been like there was that movie, it had those guys in it, they were LARPing, and it was just like, I mean, it had what was the MacLeod character's name? You remember? He had like the
you're talking about the one where he's
like an energy drink dude.
Yeah, he's one of the Ant-Man, Paul Rudd. It's
something
Paul
like
Rudd
that.
and somebody else. It's okay, so sure, that was LARPing.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying? I just feel like it's always
I
been
mean,
kind of more the butt of a joke, and so to see it like take a more mainstream approach, but be viewed just kind of like part of the culture was an interesting thing for me. But I agree with you, Brent. I'm not sure what they mean by golden age because I actually look for numbers, and I have to say that if unless you're an industry insider that actually has direct interface with publishers or something like that, you'd really that I'd say that the numbers and the players and all that stuff are kind of obfuscated because you can't just like watch a Steam active player count to see
right.
how many people are playing D&D at any given time, but you can't. I mean, you used to, and this is what I thought was interesting is that the OR report from Roll20 that seems like it hasn't come out in a couple years now at this point. After they did their thing, I mean, that was a very insightful thing to see what percentages of games, where most of their Roll20 table is dedicated to, because that gave you kind of at least a hint of the proportionality of each of the games. Jeff, you said you thought you had something there. I'm sorry.
No, it's not important. The movie was Role Models.
That's it.
Well, and there's been a couple movies. There's also the Knights of Badassdom, which was a
Yeah.
LARPing sort of show, and then D&D comes up a lot on like shows like Big Bang Theory and stuff like that. And I
That
don't
was in
necessarily,
Community. Community had a
yeah,
couple of
Community
famous
had a couple
D&D
episodes, and I don't
Yeah.
necessarily know. I mean, parts in those episodes are funny, but I don't necessarily know if they're always a butt of a joke. I think that is something that has happened, is it's been started to take a little bit more seriously.
Mhm.
But I think that's partially because of I think it's partially because of the rise of YouTube, and like you can do content about the hobby now, whereas you couldn't as easily before.
That's true.
And I think one thing that was a big factor for, I guess, whatever you want to call a golden age is probably role playing is something you can do on a computer when you're locked inside your house. So I think the time that should not be named when we were all locked in our houses, not just the nerds who stay in our houses anyways. I think that was probably the biggest time, like rising tide.
That's a good point.
For everybody is like people were like, well, what do you want to do? Like we want to get together and we want to socialize, but we don't want to just sit in front of a computer for hours talking to each other. So what are we going to do? Well, I heard we could do these role-playing game things. And or one person in the group is like, well, I used to run role-playing games in high school or college.
Sure.
Yeah. And and then they started playing. I think that was probably the biggest influence on the industry recently.
Well, and it wasn't, I mean, it wasn't just tabletop role-playing games. I mean, there was a lot of things that got shredded because of the pandemic, right? But there were a lot of things that had their own little mini booms, and they're all at a lower level now than they were then, because people are going back outside. People are being, in some cases, I mean, there was a company last week, right, where they're like, you will come back to work. You do not have a choice. These are your beautiful offices. Enjoy.
Yeah. Well, a lot of places are like that.
Yeah. So one of the things that Ben posits is he said he seems to think that the open gaming license scandal is kind of an inflection point. And I'm curious if maybe you guys are onto something a little bit differently. Is it maybe we won't have, at least maybe not the same numbers that we had, just because historically everyone was inside, everyone got their Zoom or Discord or their Roll20 subscriptions up and running, but now that they can get back out, they have other hobbies and stuff that they can do. But it, just in case anybody isn't aware of what the OGL debacle is, in case you just need that little bit of a primer, and this is your first time hearing about it, is that it was basically the open gaming license problem that Hasbro created for themselves, in so much as that they were going to send out an update in order to kind of better protect their IP, at least in their eyes. It caused such huge community backlash that they immediately backpedaled faster than one of those martial artists on wire film, just kind of leaping back from the punch.
Let's be clear. What the OGL promoted was that if you made any sort of D&D content as a creator, you were going to pay them not an insignificant amount of money that you made. And the larger content creator that you were, the larger your payment to them was going to be.
And in some cases, because of how the OGL was going to be updated, it was going to prevent you from even making money doing this. So and
you didn't own any of your own stuff anymore. If you made a module or something like that, like they could basically say, well, we're going to reprint it and not include your name in it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, originally, and this goes back to Ben's main point. Originally, the brilliance of the OGL was it allowed essentially small companies, freelance writers, whoever wanted to create content to use certain portions of the D&D rules and ideas and themes and make new content. A lot of it being, game modules, adventures, a lot of it being additional classes and stuff. But, and third-party publishers could do that and make money and use the D&D badging and trademark stuff, within whatever was allowed. I'm not here to lawyer that stuff. But what it did was Wizards of the Coast was only ever going to produce this much stuff without hiring a ton more people. So the OGL allowed them to effectively get a ton of new creators to create content for their product, thus expanding, the rising tide floats all boats. But they didn't have to pay them. They didn't have to hire them and pay them, and they could thumbs down stuff. I don't know. I'd be surprised if they couldn't say this doesn't fit our standards and you're not allowed to publish it.
I'm not sure I'm not sure that
they couldn't. I don't think they could under their OGL.
Yeah, I think that's why you had some of those weird. Obviously there were going to be some fringe modules that nobody knows the name of, but go into some pretty taboo subjects,
right?
That people keep under their, under their cover.
But for the most part, it allowed people to have access to resources like Drive-Thru RPG, and I think what was really cool was that it allowed them to create a community, and then there were these pillars of the community, D&D Shorts, Macoville, the Critical Role, and all that stuff that were able to blossom because it was a concentration of people. And it was interesting. And for me, that what was fascinating to watch was that, when he says the 2010s was kind of like the booming of the entire, for RPGs, and I would say that 2010s, I played less RPGs, which is really ironic.
Yeah, we weren't. I don't think any of us are really playing. I wasn't playing as much.
No,
but I didn't play as much because, frankly, I didn't fully enjoy 4th edition D&D. I played that in 08, 09, right? 10, maybe into 11. I played a decent amount. And my group fell apart, and then I had some life stuff happen, and I didn't really game that much.
And so basically, it was interesting because for me, like I didn't play as much when he said it was like the booming period. I only really got back into it after we committed to playing online as much as we have, and really the saving grace is the fact that we barely we haven't inked it in blood or anything like that, but
we've been consistent.
Come hell or high water, we're pretty much on our Discord game, and it's just a couple hours every week, but we shoot the shit and we catch up.
Yeah, but I think we've only missed a handful of weeks in a year, which for a lot of games, like scheduling's the thing that kills them all, right? You got 5 people, 6 people, 7 people, and you get one game every 4 months. You get one session every 4 months.
Yeah, or when you only play monthly or something like that, it tends to be easier to forget that session's coming up, especially if you don't have a commitment to it. And so, so the OGL being his main, is what he suggests as being the main reason why a lot of these communities are fracturing off and building their own communities. But I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I do think that there are some creators that had hitched their wagon with the D&D community, but in Matt Colville's own admission, he had always thought that he was going to splinter off at some point. It just the OGL thing isn't that what he had suggested? Is the OGL kind of accelerated those plans to kind of do his own?
I think it accelerated everybody's.
A lot of people's,
yeah. So. It don't get me wrong. If you want to make 5e content or 6e content or whatever content you want to make, you can definitely do that. But I think some of these people had already had designs to move on, but it just the OGL was kind of
it accelerated it.
So. Some of the games may have looked very different though if they could still use some of the D&D licensing.
That's true. That's true.
Like they might be a different game, but still use some of the same monsters and mechanics and give some of it to the OGL.
Could have. Yeah, no, it could have.
It would look more like Powered by the Apocalypse, which has spawned tons of other games that look this
Mhm.
like draw from the same various building blocks, but are totally different.
Yeah.
And they all have Powered by the Apocalypse in their little copyright information, you know.
Yeah. So
Um,
his main thing is that with all these companies, Critical Role, MCDM, the company that makes Shadow Dark. Why did I just blank on there?
Arcane Library? Is that-
Yeah, Arcane Library. Sorry, Arcane Library. But you know, just to use three. I mean, Kobold Press is sort of moving that way, but they look more like they're just doing a flavor of fifth edition.
Mhm.
All of these companies, well, you know, instead of the pie being mostly Dungeons and Dragons, you're fracturing it, right? You're fracturing the base, and anytime you splinter the base, you get these different fiefdoms, these different fan bases that are like, well, I only play this, and I only play this, and I only play this, and you know, they don't check out, you know, this other stuff, and it leads to less cross pollination, I guess. I mean, that's the core of his argument, right?
Yeah, I think you're hitting the part where he basically, when he's calling out these big creators that are creating their own thing, is he basically is suggesting that that's going to silo each of these different communities kind of on their own. And I think that there are definitely two types of players: the people that will, or there's probably more, but to oversimplify it, they're probably the people that this is not going to phase them at all. They're going to continue to play D&D. They're going to see 6th edition come out and everything is going to be fine. I doubt there's going to be someone so loyal to these other creators that they're going to just say D&D is dead, go get a big book burning going, and then only buy MCDM books or Darrington Press books or something like that. I don't really feel like that's how role players work. I mean, even just looking at Brent's
Well,
shelf, like, I mean, even though he hated 4th edition, I think there are still some 4th edition books right behind him.
No, there's none. There aren't any up there. No,
Oh, no, there aren't. Oh, I
there
stand
aren't.
corrected.
I
No,
I think that the three of us
I still
might
have
be.
them.
I think we might be more unicorns than we think. You know what I mean? Because like we're in a group of unicorns, and we're like, there's unicorns all over the place. Because we like books, we like reading, we like trying new systems. Obviously, not
Mhm.
we tried new systems before we were doing it here on the podcast, right, on the YouTube
Yeah,
channel.
but not to the
Um,
frequency that we're
but
doing it now. Like,
but
definitely
back in
once
my
a
retail days, right,
Mhm.
back in the mid early 2000s, right, the aughts, I guess is what we call them. Like I literally had people that would come in and only buy White Wolf books. They would buy other White Wolf settings and other White Wolf games, but
Mhm.
all they would buy is White Wolf. They wouldn't try anything else. They certainly didn't want anything to do with D&D, which is fine. Play what you love.
Mhm.
But there are people that get into one system or one publisher and never leave.
Mhm.
I think.
There's certainly Pathfinder fans that are to the point where they're like, no, I don't play anything else. Pathfinder, it's Pathfinder or die.
Well, I don't think they play anything other. Like, I think mainly when Pathfinder players say that, they mean they don't play D&D. But it's what they mean. Because I think most of the Pathfinder players that I've seen, they play Pathfinder for their fantasy game, and then they play other games for other stuff that's not fantasy.
Not
Sure.
fantasy.
And I think that's what happens. But I think one thing in our group that's always been that is a little different is most of us are GMs of someone. Like, we all run games. So, and I think when you run games a lot, you come down to one of the things that happens is you're always looking for that game that you feel is the perfect game for you. So you wind up fishing around a lot. And as somebody who runs games, that's what I've always kind of done is I was kind of like, oh, what is a better system to run this style of game in?
Mhm.
Which one do I like better and stuff like that? And I think that's the thing. But I think you will have your fans. I think a lot of times they'll be players more than GMs because they're going to be like, oh yeah, this is the game we play, and then they just buy those books if they buy those books. But I think a lot of people do branch out eventually. I think a lot of people will be hardcore for a while until they run into that one game where they're trying something new and it just doesn't work the way that they want it to.
Mhm.
And they're like, well, what could I run this in? And then that's when you start looking as a GM.
Mhm.
But I don't think I'm surprised at how strong the role-playing community is because I never would have thought that when I was younger.
Yeah.
But it's a much more accepted thing now than it ever was before, and there's a lot more content out there, and I don't think that's going to stop. I think you're going to see diversified content, Like I think that's one thing that's neat. So here's something weird that I realized. Like I listen to a lot of actual plays and I look for a lot of actual plays. I don't actually find that many just D&D actual plays that aren't like Critical Role. Like I don't know if it's because the space is like filled by them or not, but there aren't very many that I found that are just like, oh, this is just a D&D game. Or Pathfinder. Like Pathfinder's another one where it's like, oh, they just play Pathfinder. Especially content creators, they usually play other games.
That's interesting.
Spread it around.
Yeah.
I see a lot of
curious though, right? I mean, like, wouldn't you play the biggest game for the biggest community? Like,
you would think so, but I don't see it as often when I look. I was trying to find a D&D one that I wanted to listen to just to see about how people are playing it, and I felt like it was kind of difficult to find.
The hard part is like when you're actually playing a game and you got a group of people playing it, like you have to like it. Like I get trying to play the biggest game if that's got the biggest potential audience if you're a content creator. I understand the motivation, but you know what happens in our games when people start losing interest and they don't care about their characters and they don't care about the setting and they don't care about the storyline, the game falls apart.
Yeah.
And anybody that's watching you do that as a real play or a live play, they're going to pick up on it and they're not going to want to continue watching, and they're certainly not going to click on another episode that they see from you.
Yeah, there have been ones that I enjoyed that I listened to that were just straight 5th edition D&D, but not that many really. I don't feel like it's out there as much as you would
for
think.
It being the Juggernaut game.
Yeah, for it being content creator. I would think if I look up D&D 5th edition actual play, like I would think I would just have like scads of them show up. But it never feels like that for me. I think Fandelver has one going. Somebody's playing Fandelver. I've seen in one of the ones that I play.
The new Shattered Obelisk or just the Fandelver? Do you know?
It just says Fandelver. I haven't listened to it.
Okay.
Because also my desire to listen to Great Dungeons and Dragons is not what it used to be.
That's fair.
So there's that.
Don't hate the player, hate the game or something. I don't know.
Yeah. So I think that the truth of the matter is, if you say the golden age of gaming is that D&D is popular, yeah, I would say that's probably not going to last, because I think the last year has shown that certain elements of Dungeons and Dragons have damaged their fan base, and I don't know how many people, and being people are looking at other games, I don't know how many people are going to go back.
No, that's probably true. Go ahead, Mike.
So I think there's two areas that we could probably explore a little bit more. So to further flesh out this part right here is, I don't really think that D&D has a strong direction out. It doesn't have a strong direction to it. It's not a strong game. It's just it's a game that is living on its own prior successes, in my opinion. Because I mean, when you look at the books that it's released lately, there have been some okay stuff. Like, I haven't purchased a lot of D&D books after I got out of there, but like, I mean, you tend to feel when you get out the scales, it feels like people are complaining more about new D&D products than they are raving about new D&D products. And I think that hurts them in the long run to have just kind of successive problems with each of their launches where they constantly have to backpedal or apologize about some stupid thing that they did.
I mean, you did love the Spelljammer books.
Oh, oh God, I can't get enough of that Spelljammer book. I cuddle with it at night.
The hard part is, I think if you zoom out, if I had to sum up Wizards of the Coast problems, it's the fact that Hasbro owns them, and Hasbro is trying to justify a share price that is not growing, that is not climbing in the stock market. Like Hasbro's feels desperate. And their cash cow is Wizards of the Coast, because it's, in my belief, without having poured over their, financials, it's Magic and it's Dungeons and Dragons that essentially are carrying Hasbro at this point. And so almost everything that has happened, the OGL, like, well, can't we make some money off of those people? They're using our IP. All of their decisions feel driven by Hasbro leadership squeezing Wizards of the Coast leadership. And I'm not trying to give Wizards of the Coast leadership a free pass.
Yeah.
But I think that they're closer in touch with their customer base. Hasbro is very much closely in touch with their stockholder base, which is really the owners of their company. So they got an answer to, but all of their decisions, it feels like you can trace back to that. well, can't we just make this book? Can't we just make it 64 pages instead of 128? Does everything need to be in color? Like, can't you just turn this, can't we produce this with 5 people instead of 12?
I think one of their business model titles right now could be "Desperately in Search of That Video Game Money," because that seems to be what they want to do. Is they want to market it like a video game, and it's just not. And I think it's giving them problems. But I don't think. Do I think D&D is ever going to die? No, I just don't think it's ever going to die. If TSR and their gross, I mean, they had a better reputation in some things, but they grossly mismanaged their product for the most part. And if they didn't kill it, I don't think anybody else will. Like I talked in an earlier podcast, it would be more like somebody will buy it. Somebody will buy D&D if Hasbro gets too far in the dumps with it.
Yeah, if they're in the dumpster, they're going to start selling IP.
Yeah.
Or leasing it.
And honestly, like the interesting part to me is that, when he talks at Ben Riggs, I mean, he has a lot of experience with TSR and all that as part of his research for his book. And obviously he's been in the industry for enough time to have developed some probably well-informed opinions. But he mentioned that TSR died because of its own kind of self-cannibalization. It created these sectors and stuff, or these sections, because people that play Forgotten Realms didn't play Dark Sun. Apparently, this number of Dark Sun players was much smaller than some of the others.
There was 8 globally. 8. I think I saw that was the one thing I saw numbers on.
Brent's
I love
table
Dark
and
Sun.
maybe
I don't love it as much as Brent does, but I love Dark Sun.
Just me.
So what's interesting to me though is I don't think the environment in the 90s was the same.
It's not.
I mean you really can't compare them, because the online community factor is such a big component of this, and whether these games succeed or die or anything like that I feel like you're probably right that if TSR or not TSR, if Wizards ultimately finds that they're not being profitable and D&D has to be spun off into its own company. I mean, that's not unusual for these big mega companies to have that stuff shuffle around. I mean, I wouldn't say that that's the death of D&D, and who knows, it might get into the stewardship of somebody that has a better direction for it.
I mean, just look at like White Wolf was probably the second biggest game producer in the 90s, like edgy White Wolf. I think at one point they had surpassed D&D actually as like a popular role-playing game, and they were on TV and stuff a lot. Like they had their own TV shows as well, and they're still around. I mean, they're been fractured as a company, but they're still around. And I think it's the same sort of thing. Like at some point, you're just too big for the name to be completely erased. Yeah. And I don't think D&D being what it is, I don't think I think it won't ever fall that far from grace.
No.
Well, and what would be, I think what would be more likely is that and so I think that there's probably two things that are happen. If you wanted to make a bet, and if you were to be a betting man, and you were to say, okay, so D&D, we put D&D on one, and you bet how will D&D outlast any of these successors that it spawned? Well, we could say MCDM, we could say Tales of the Valiant, we could input any variable you want in there, and I think the likelihood that D&D, that's where your money should go. Just because, I mean, it's got the brand recognition and it's got the staying power. So unless something absolutely falls out of the bottom of D&D and just as an IP it evaporates somehow, like, I mean, I feel, and I don't want to say that these new IPs aren't good. I'm just saying that the likelihood that they fail in their venture is much higher than D&D stumbles so much that it disappears.
Correct. That's
true. What it does to the overall player base, I mean, is probably the interesting question. And I think the reason why Ben wrote this essay, for lack of a better term, because splitting the base creates these smaller fandoms. I mean, there's always been small fandoms, right? There's always been small publishers of role-playing games. So I guess I agree with him. I guess
is the era of the heartbreaker making
if 2020, 2021 was the golden age, then yes, I think it's going to be downhill for a little while until something, newer, neater, greater comes along. Is it MCDM? Is it what the stuff Darrington Press is working on? I honestly don't know. And all the other companies out there, right? Is it Pathfinder, their new version where they're splitting away from the OGL? I don't know.
Or is it D&D when they come out with an edition that people love again, because it'll happen.
Yeah, it will
Like
at
if it's
least.
not if it's not 6th edition, they'll languish in 6th edition for a while or whatever the hell they're calling it. D&D
forever.
Yeah,
next.
because it
D&D
seems like
NXT
it's a new
or
edition
D&D.
again, right? Because it wasn't going to be a new edition.
They're still
It
calling
wasn't
it.
even going to be 5th edition Redux or anything. It was just going to
No,
be
it's just gonna be 5th edition.
we're putting out new books. Well, that's a new.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
And I
The rules
yeah,
are different. No, they're not.
exactly. I just think, and that's the thing that fixes it, right? Like D&D can do whatever they want that's shitty, but the
Mhm.
moment that new game comes out and people are like, "Oh, this is fucking good," like the moment that happens, people forget everything.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, and if anything, all we've really proven over the last 18, 20 months or whatever it is that people have short memories for for holding Wizards of the Coast to account.
Oh my
Like
god.
the average person, maybe had it blipped on their radar, but I can't truly say that I'd say that D&D being a bad game is driving more people away than all of the other press media bad things that are happening in the D&D sphere. But I'm going to say that I don't feel like these new creators creating their own thing and going a separate direction is going to fracture the community as much as was suggested in the article. I mean, it could. I could be 100% wrong. I just feel like
sure.
people are going to buy the books. They'll try it out. They'll put it on the shelf. I don't. Do I think that Cobalt Press will go off in a direction of Paizo? I would like them to. I would like them to get their own game that's much more distinct, the 5 edition, than what I've read Tales of the Valiant currently is. But I just feel like it's people are gonna still play games. I mean, I think that, it's become an acceptable hobby. It's just that what game they're playing, it may not be D&D. There may be a cultural reference in 5 years that basically talks about, Pathfinder in a TV show instead of D&D, or God forbid, it could be talking about World of Darkness in some capacity for some reason.
I think it will fracture the community, but I think overall it's healthier for the hobby as a whole.
Mhm. I
Is my
mean, so you don't need a gateway RPG, and I don't even think D&D was a great gateway RPG. I know a lot of people that didn't play D&D as their first game, but there's a lot of
Yeah,
people
I
that
don't
did.
know. It is. I think does get people into the hobby shop sometimes saying, "Hey, what about this D&D thing?" Um, but and then it kind of falls from there. But I don't know.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting times with all the
Yeah.
growth and
yeah.
changes.
So, needless to say, I think that there are some flaws to Ben Riggs's, his essay. But I mean, it seems well reasoned. And could he be absolutely correct? He could. These things, there could be a decline in that. Do I attribute it to the OGL and the splintering of games? Maybe not. Maybe people are getting outside more. That could also be it.
That could be
Well,
right.
I think it's as easy a starting point to pin the tail on the donkey, at
Mhm.
as anything. But
But I mean, and even just having more ways to communicate over the internet is probably helpful because now you can
Mhm.
find people, with looking for group Reddits. There are applications that allow you to look for professional
you can,
DMs.
you can
I
actually
mean,
find a professional DM and pay like $10 to
They
play
run
one of their
games. Yeah.
yeah,
yeah,
and they run the game on time, supposedly, right?
mhm,
On time and
yeah,
well, and for the advertised amount of time. So you know what I mean? It's like any other service that you pay for.
yeah. And
Yep.
so instead of doing an escape room, you just sign up for
I,
Brent's Dark Sun
right. I
game.
don't have to be this guy that doesn't know anybody else that plays, that loves buying role playing books. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And reads them and goes, God, I wish I had a group I could play with. It's
Patreon
easier
exclusive.
than ever now to find groups.
yeah. Patreon exclusive. Yeah, and I mean there may be, and I don't even know. I always hear that there's a DM shortage, but maybe there isn't. Maybe there's just
No, there
it's just
probably
it's
is.
a
I think there
it's a
always is. It's more work. It's
It
actual
is
work.
more work. Yeah,
It's more
it's
work.
more work.
Yeah.
yeah.
But
So we'll see. So I think that's probably enough that I have to talk about this. I don't want any ill will for Ben Riggs for having apparently stirred the pot in the community so much so that I mean, based on what I was seeing online, like you had major names jumping in on this essay and commenting their own feelings and stuff, and
Well,
I don't feel like
yeah,
there was
Dungeon
definitely
Craft.
not one opinion out
Yeah,
there.
Dungeon Craft was one of the ones that I watched to research this. So just so people know, we weren't directly ripping off his content. We were inspired by his content.
Yeah.
But generating discourse is a positive thing.
Mhm.
Getting people within the hobby, within the industry, to think about these things and to consider them, I think, is a positive.
Yeah.
Like I'm glad that he wrote. I'm glad that he wrote the article. I'm glad that I read it.
It's always
Yeah.
better to have a conversation than not.
Yeah.
Exactly. And honestly, I'm going to equate this to beer. I remember back in the day, there was a lot of beers, so there weren't so many beers. And now there's a lot of beers again. Probably the same thing for RPGs.
It just
I
may
mean,
not be as good for, the company that owns the biggest beer.
yeah.
In the moment.
This isn't. I mean, you may know better than me, Jeff, but didn't microbreweries weren't really a thing until like the '90s again, weren't they? Like that's when that all came back.
No, you had a few. You had like Anchor Steam, right?
Mhm.
Was probably the first really successful independent brewer and they just went out of business a couple of weeks ago.
Oh no.
No, craft brewing killed one of the first craft brewers, right? Samuel Adams, another one. They got bought out by, I want to say, Anheuser-Busch InBev.
Oh.
But maybe
See, and maybe that's what TSR or not TSR, Wizards of the Coast starts doing is they start buying really successful other games, and then they just start,
yeah, they set up a sub publisher, a boutique publisher. It's like all the book companies do, right?
Yeah. Like, I mean, what's to say
There's
that
only
Wizards?
like what 4 or 5 actual book publishers in the world that aren't like the self-publishing things.
Yeah.
They just own like 15 imprints each. It's the same thing with hotels. It's just,
Man,
let's not pretend like there's as much choice as we think there is.
Wouldn't that be hilarious though if that became the new role-playing game designer pathways? Be like, I'm just going to make my game big enough that some big company buys it, and I could just move off on big money off of whatever that is. I just go make a quick couple million off of my idea or something. Kind of like the Shark Tank of RPGs or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm only gonna invest if we can license this. We're gonna license it and hope that they buy the whole thing. Right.
God. I think we can leave it there. So I hope you all enjoyed our discussion. Like I said, this is a near and dear to our heart topic because we obviously love talking about role-playing games. So if the golden age is over, I would be sad. I hope that you guys would join me in my sorrows. But Jeff, do you want to tell people how they can get a hold of us if they want to reach us?
If you got something to say, negative, positive, whatever, you can find us on social media. We are on Facebook, Threads, Twitter, and YouTube. And you want to look for us at Rollwise. You can get us by email, rollwiseguys@gmail.com.
And as always, thank you everybody for joining us. We really do appreciate it. Welcome to the golden age of our podcast, hopefully. And as always, roll well and roll wise and be safe out there.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.